Welcome back. We are talking central banking, the art of monetary policy making. Across the Atlantic, global central bankers are battling inflation. Inflation is becoming low, very low. Can you imagine, if you're battling low inflation? If that was the fixation, the monetary policy target was to battle low inflation, how nice would that be for the monetary policy maker in Kenya?
So do you see why it's not very easy to make that decision? Because the world powers have a different problem from what you have sitting in Kenya today. But then whatever decisions the world powers make, whatever decisions they make have a potential impact on your own stance. I like that you've talked about US and you've talked about the Bank of England and the EU. I think some of the key risks that we run are probably twofold. Firstly, today, when the Bank of England has made a decision, it's saying that they're putting a lesser probability in terms of getting a proper Brexit plan, right? That has a direct consequence on us because we do export to the EU and to the UK. They're one of our core trade partners. So whatever decisions that they're making there politically, they have an impact on us in terms of our trade balance. So if anything happens and we're unable to access those markets, that's a potential risk factor. I think it's something that the central bank has been talking about for almost for over a year, and they have been trying to speak to the different stakeholders there to be able to mitigate the risks.
Yeah.
That's one thing that I like about the current setup of the central bank. I find that over the last 3 to 4 years, they've been more proactive in engaging stakeholders to find out what's happening.
Yeah.
Even when you want to take investors to meet with them, it's much easier to get access to the central bank today and understand what decisions they're making and what parameters they're using to make that decision. The second thing that I also want to point out is on what's happening in the US. When the US now moves from the hawkish to the dovish stance and they're forcing their hand on other people in terms of their currency, I don't know what that means for us. Because then for you as a person sitting in the Central Bank of Kenya, your intervention has been on a trading parameter.
Yeah.
But you cannot ignore the fact that your capital markets and your FDI largely comes from the States.
Yeah.
What do you do? What do you make of that?
I think that, my view is slightly different. I think that modern monetary policy making today should also, the mandate of modern monetary policy, and we've seen this in the United States, is that it has gone beyond just price stability. Now we are it now includes growth, and it's incumbent upon the central bank, in this case the US Federal Reserve, to ensure that the economy is operating at full employment.
Okay.
Now, that is one of my other problems with the monetary policy, the policy making in Kenya today, that it's time we expanded the scope of monetary policy to go beyond price stability and say, can we also put in growth? So when you say that the economy is not performing, that the monetary policy has a role to play in it.
What role does it have?
And especially monetary expansion, just to make sure that, and I'm not talking about helicopter money where they're dropping monies from the helicopter like they've done in the advanced economies. It's making sure that, look, if there's some tightness in liquidity conditions in the market, like we are in Kenya today, could you please extend that? I mean, I'm talking about, for instance, in Nigeria, where the Central Bank of Nigeria has even talked of purchasing debt instruments from corporates, because they're cognizant of the fact that banks are not extending credit to the people that need it. So that capital allocation in the economy is not efficient.
It's not
so
efficient.
When they come in,
they
they address some inefficiencies, and that's what my problem with. And when I saw that the central bank governor's term has been renewed for another 4 years, I asked myself, so what next?
I'm very happy. Before even they renewed it, I like what they came up with in terms of demonetization and rolling out the new notes. I don't know if you've seen the new 1,000.
Have you seen the new 1,000?
Oh, it looks nice. Today was my first time to see it. So I had the old one and the new one. I really don't want to use the new one. I want to put it in a frame. I'm so happy about it. It looks so nice. And then it has a good feel. Like I feel like when I'm out there in the world and I'm making payments with 1,000, they won't accept my shillings. But I just feel it looks nice. Anyway, that's not the point.
Just
the point is the point is that's 100. The point is that the demonetization. I like what you're talking about in terms of monetary policy and enhancing access to credit, or at least money supply in the economy. You can't ignore the fact that for us, corruption has been an issue, right?
You can say that again.
Corruption is an issue, and anyway, that's a conversation for another day. The element of demonetization at least for us, because we are giving it a longer period in terms of 3 months before people have to actually surrender the old notes and get the new notes, which is something that India did not do. And India is a good reference point because overnight, whatever currency you had, you could not use it. And that created a whole problem.
It was no longer legal tender.
It was no longer legal tender, and that was very chaotic. So I think for us, when you're trying to look at and evaluate the team at the central bank and the objective they have in terms of ensuring that government business is working and the economy is working, some of the things that they're actually proposing, I think, are quite innovative.
Okay.
And if they work, they don't need to go to 100%. Even though we get near 50, my mother always says, Mbithe, at times if you cannot get 100, when you get 50, does the teacher allow you to go to the next class? One of my lecturers used to call it, balancing. It's a proper balancing on that.
Yeah.
You're teetering on failure, but you haven't failed. If we get to that level...
It's a statement of equilibrium.
Exactly. What do you think of the demonetization? Because I think it's a great move, where you're actually saying, fine, you could have all this amounts of money sitting in your house, but in 3 months, they're effectively not legal tender. And then we need to swap them. If we swap them, do you see an element of now this strategy that has been proposed by the CBK actually working to ensure there's an extended level of liquidity? Because people have not been spending. Maybe they're holding it. Maybe that's the wrong approach. What do you think about that?
I think that the demonetization, first of all, was all about complying with the constitutional requirements, that you no longer need to put the portrait of a human being on the currency, whether it's a note or the coin. We still have portrait of her.
Yes, we do.
The portrait has not gone away. But broadly, I think that the communication around demonetization, and I've seen some of the press releases from the central bank, I think they are wrongly insisting on illegal, stamping out, extinguishing illegal flows, and I don't think that's an objective they can achieve.
That's true.
For quite a number of reasons. First is that if you look at the asset allocation among this class of people you think are participating in illegal flow, I don't think someone keeps $10 million in their houses in liquidity.
At least I don't.
I don't. But I think in terms of asset allocation, and I don't have any empirical analysis on this, but I think asset allocation is heavily skewed on physical properties.
Yes, it is. In
downtown Nairobi, in mid-Nairobi. And so in terms of, they do keep money, I can agree, but I don't think to the extent that it's being made to look like. The second issue is that there is absolutely no correlation or causation between the money circulation and corruption. I tell you what, in Japan, which has the highest portion of currency circulation in the world, currency circulation as share of Japan's GDP is about 17%.
Wow.
But in the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index, they're ranking way lower than Kenya, which has about 10%. Same thing about Nigeria. Okay. So and then the last issue is that, as you've alluded to, is that they have an incredibly long time to demonetize their 1,000 shilling note. You have about 3 months now. That's a long time. People can get creative around that. But hold on, that thought me there. Yesterday you were talking about IMF and the IMF note. They had this wonderful research report saying that interest rate caps have failed in Kenya. Well, they haven't had a policy recommendation. I personally have read it, but you did a brilliant job on it yesterday.
Thank you.
What did you like about it? Anything particular you liked about it?
Well, we gave highlights on what the IMF report was saying, and in summary, they're saying that the methodology of implementing the rate caps was quite stringent. They did an evaluation of other countries that have done the same. Most countries don't have a floor in terms of this is how much you have to pay for deposits. They say we were very stringent, and because of that stringent move, then there was an element of reduced financial intermediation.
Absolutely.
The banks moved private debt, and moved that to public debt. The government has been the biggest beneficiary. As a consequence, that has been able to keep the government primary deficit on an incremental level in absolute terms. So they're saying in a way it's enabled that kind of behavior. And the basic proposal was to say you don't necessarily need to get rid of it, but you have to review the ceiling to allow for the banking institutions to price in risk.
Yeah.
SME debt has actually come more from 17% to 10%. So they're saying your SMEs
the number of
are
the
not,
banks.
yes. So that's what
that's the share of their loan books.
That is exactly what they're saying. So, and I think on the consequence of that, if what they're doing now, I like that they're teaching us and showing us what has gone wrong and what has gone right. And I keep saying, I think on the back of that, where we were last year when the finance bill introduced the repeal is not where we are this year.
Yeah.
I'm putting a higher probability to that repeal going through. Whether it's a full repeal or a partial repeal, I think there's much higher probability. But more importantly, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the IMF report and whether the IMF is the one that's controlling monetary and fiscal policy in Kenya.
But you can bet that I didn't agree with a number of points in that report. One is that I think that if you're pointing fingers that the interest rate caps have failed to deliver the results, then you have to also point a finger at the fiscal stance of the government. That to a large extent, the government has contributed to the failure of the rate caps by the fact that they are crowding out the private sector. And that's a very important element in that discussion, in my view. The second discussion is that they say that apart from failing to deliver credit to the economy, part of sucking out liquidity out of the economy, the rate cap has also disabled the monetary policy transmission, which is true. But I'm saying that in a very small, open economy like Kenya, I think the exchange rate channel is much more important than the credit channel in terms of monetary policy.
Why do
and
you
all
say
monetary
that?
policy innovations should actually be directed towards managing that exchange
Let
rate
me hold
channel.
you there. Please
Because
elaborate. That's a very, very good point. That's a very interesting point. So you're saying, what should define monetary policy?
I think monetary policy today, in an environment that we're in today, should be defined by the performance of the exchange rate channel in terms of transmitting policy decisions.
As opposed to interest rates?
As opposed to interest, because
Interesting.
historically, and I'm talking because I've gone through some empirical analysis.
Okay, that's very
that
good.
The influence that the interest rate channel or the credit channel has on output aggregates is much less, is not significant compared to the output that the exchange rate channel has.
Wow.
What this says is that as a country, we are a very small, open country with a floating, it's a floating fixed account. Current account, capital account.
Capital account.
We import a lot. The other day I went to the supermarket and I bought grated nuts from Indonesia. And I kept thinking, can't we make this aren't we making this thing in
But have you ever seen...
Mombasa?
I don't know how
It's going for 100 shillings.
those plantations look like. So.
Indonesia. We're buying nuts from the coconut from Indonesia.
Okay.
So the point is that our inflation is to a very large extent imported. We import a lot of inflation. If you look at energy prices, we import most of our energy usables, and that means the pump price is a very important indicator. So that means that if the exchange rate market, the exchange rate channel is not supportive of what we are doing, then you're potentially looking at a high inflation. And if you look at historically, monetary inflation and non-monetary inflation, the non-monetary inflation has a huge impact on headline prices. That's the second issue.
Okay.
The third issue is that they're saying there's some fiscal multiplier. Sorry, there's some multiplier out of credit growth. But my fundamental question is, with the experience of 2008, do banks on a net basis, I think they destroy an economy.
Elaborate.
Because look at it this way, banks, yes, they extend credit, they help the economy allocate capital efficiently from surplus areas to deficit areas, and that allocation is used to, into usable economic activities that contribute to a final output. But 2008, US government and a number of advanced economies had to spend a lot of billions and billions of dollars to bail out banks. On a net basis, banks destroyed the economy. I think the importance of banks, in my assessment, is being overplayed. Take the example of Kenya.
No, hold on. Banks did not destroy the economy in the States, but they were part and parcel, but
they nearly brought the global economy to its knees.
You cannot put the entire blame on them.
It was all the bank.
Hold on, George. So what are you saying? Are you saying that today the extent of bank failure is way up there in terms of chances of happening? Or are you saying that our banks are too big to fail and that they are causing a risk to the economic output of this country?
That is an overplayed statement. That too big to fail is a statement that banks use to make sure that they're covered, their backs are covered. But the truth is that, look at, for instance, in Kenya, bank failures in Kenya. apart from the fact that they have to be bailed out or some resolution mechanism have to be put in place, but they have profound impacts on people. For instance, Chase Bank. There are a lot of sad stories that you read or heard about Chase Bank. People losing their deposits. And that's, in fact, I spoke to one CEO who told me that the impact of Chase Bank on the economy could be close to 700 billion shillings.
In what sense? Elaborate.
Yeah, look at the impact of the amount of deposits that have been lost, amount of delayed investments.
Is that an issue of the bank or is it an issue of corporate governance?
Well, but the point is that if a bank fails, it is not just the shareholders that are at a loss. It's a whole, there's a
yes,
whole...
I agree, but then you must separate, you have to separate the issue, because if you have a blanket statement and you're saying banks made the US economy fail, therefore banks will make the Kenyan economy fail.
Well, they didn't make the US
banks
economy
that have failed
They
in
nearly
Kenya,
brought the global
the banks
economy
that have failed in
to its
Kenya,
knees.
the banks that have failed in Kenya have
Yes.
had an impact, but the cause of that failure had an extent of it corporate governance. There was a corporate governance issue there.
Yeah.
So it wasn't basically the operations of a bank that is supposed to be in good standing that went bust because of its lending habits.
But look at it this way. You have, I give an example. If you're a Chase Bank customer, and let's say you're not a depositor, you're a borrower, for instance, that means if you're relying, if you're borrowing Chase Bank, that means you cannot continue accessing credit lines. Let's say you have an OD arrangement with the Chase Bank. And you know, as OD goes, it keeps evolving. If that bank comes down, that means you cannot no longer be able to access your OD arrangements. You cannot be able to access financing. That means you have to delay any investment that you want. If you're a real estate company, then you have to delay any new investment you make. If you're a manufacturing company, that means you have to delay any new capex that you want to make.
But that's
until you get a new borrowing arrangement with another bank,
okay,
which will take another 6 months.
George.
Now, those, yes.
There's the element from what you're saying of SMEs are important for the output of the economy.
Yeah.
Do we agree on that?
Very, especially in an economy like Kenya.
And if this touch points of this SMEs in terms of access to credit, if they're aligned to a bank or to the banking sector, if that access to credit closes, there's a huge impact in
Yes.
terms of those businesses.
Yes.
So we have a couple of things going on here, and I'll bring you back to the IMF report. There's the element of this bank, that Chase Bank, and the people who are connected to Chase Bank and the issues surrounding Chase Bank. But there's also another element that the IMF is saying, and you can agree or disagree. I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. They're saying because banks are unable to price the risk affiliated with SMEs,
Yeah.
which I completely agree with them.
Absolutely.
As a consequence, the funding that is going to the SMEs as a percentage of the total has dropped from 17% to about 7%, 7 to 10%. And they're saying because of that drop, they have actually conducted their own empirical analysis, and they're saying that drop has effectively cost Kenya a loss of 25 bips to 75 bips of GDP
Growth.
every year.
Yes.
So then are you disputing the fact that access to credit, for whatever reason, to SMEs means that the economic growth does not get to its full potential?
Well, liquidity is very important for the economy. I mean, I do agree with that. The fundamental question I'm posing here is that, is risk-taking economically beneficial? And banks participate in risk, in the business of risk-taking, they take your deposit and pay you a measly 2%.
Now 7.5, 7%.
Oh, the floor was removed.
Oh, yes, it
So
was.
They could give you,
yes, it was.
They could give you 80 basis points on your hard-earned money. Now, they take your hard-earned money and give you a measly 100 basis points. And they lend it at a whopping 13%.
And they still say they cannot price the risk.
And this, yes, and they still say they can't price risk. That business of risk-taking, how beneficial is it to the economy? Is it productive? Now, some texts that are coming across are saying it's not a productive venture. If you take your money and lend it, participate in a CPR program, give it to a company that is selling debt notes, you've basically taken a risk. You've cost your money, and you've given it out at 18%.
Exactly.
So they're saying that risk, participating in the risk is not beneficial to the economy. More so because look at banks, for instance. Look at what you've said, that the paper is saying that because the share of SME loans in total loan book in the industry, especially for tier 2 and tier 1 banks, dropped significantly, the economy took a haircut to the tune of 25 basis points.
25 to 75.
25%. That's in nominal terms, That's a very significant figure.
It is. I mean, if you actually accumulate it,
It's a very significant
but
figure.
then what you're saying, George, and you keep arguing with me and saying you want to sell banks, you're effectively saying that this environment that we're in, distress in terms of the economic activity, and the fact that the rate cap has happened and there's no access to credit, it has given a massive arbitrage opportunity to banks, and they have been the biggest beneficiaries. Yet all the time you keep saying sell banks, and you always you oppose me on buy banks. Buy bank, Kenyan banks at 1 times book, 17% ROE, 8% yield in a tough rate cap environment that's potentially about to be changed, and you still say sell banks?
I'm not buying that.
No, you're contradicting
Sell all
yourself.
the banks.
George, you're
Look,
contradicting
be there.
yourself.
Look at it this way, be there. It's all about the future.
But you're saying
It's
the
about the
IMF report
future.
is wrong. So you're
It's
saying the
about the future.
IMF report is wrong.
What is the growth story of banks?
If the
What's the
IMF
next growth
report
story of
is
banks?
wrong, then you should be buying banks.
No, the IMF story, I'm disagreeing with it on a fundamental basis that I think they are overplaying. And my point
George,
is
look
that
at
the
that
role
guy.
of the economy, the role of banks in
Okay.
the economy is overplayed.
Yes.
And too much due attention is given to banks. Every year when the CS is reading his budget, or like for the past 3 years, 2 years, the CS is reading his budget speech, he has to insert a small clause there that I propose to repeal Section 33 of the banking sector.
I don't
Sorry,
think you'll
Banking
repeat that
Amendment
next year.
Act 2016.
1 year from now. That
What
will
are
be
you saying? That
repeated.
you're giving undue attention to banks, but banks on a net basis over the last 2 years, they've destroyed the economy.
So you're saying it's the banks that have destroyed the economy?
Yeah, they're
Why-
almost bringing our economy
Why
to
do
the
you say
knees.
that?
Because then they refuse to extend risk to the economy. Instead, they're buying government
The buying government
debt.
So it's not the government who's demanding for more. It's just what you're saying is the government received the money because the banks refused to give the private sector.
Let me ask him there. Split between giving, let me ask. Look, when you are a bank, what's your core business? Is to give out money,
Yes.
right? You should not be fixated with short-term gains, but in the
Risk.
long term.
You have to mitigate risk. No, come
The
on.
nature of banking business is
Let me
risk.
tell you, if you had CS a seat today, even though it's 1,000 shillings, I will give it to him happily because I know I will get it back. You, first, I may not know where I'll find you tomorrow, and then I don't know what will happen between you. You don't even have bodyguards. So between you and your car, the risk associated with you as an individual in the private sector.
Let me ask
for
you there.
14%.
Let me ask him there. The Treasury here has proposed that all motorcycles and the tricycles and bicycles, I don't know what they call them, tuk-tuks and border borders, they must have third-party cover. It's mandatory.
That's important.
That's a risk.
How is that a risk? You're
Could you
mitigating
imagine-
risk.
Could you imagine which
Have you been on a
underwriter-
border?
Can you, long time ago.
Long time ago is how many years?
But I'm going to try the Uber border.
But have you seen, okay, fine, you must have seen a border driving in front of you.
Yes.
So when
All
you're,
the time.
do you see how they drive?
Yeah.
So are you saying that third party risk for the people on that border?
No, actually, I'm asking you for more
And the
on
people
on
around?
on the underwriting side.
Yes.
Think about the insurance company that's going to issue those policies.
Wow, it's just not listed, unfortunately.
It's almost it's a known risk. You know, the whole concept of insurance is to cover you against
Yes.
unforeseen.
So then what are your thoughts on that proposal?
I think it's good.
It's a good proposal.
It's a good proposal. I hope
Okay.
it sells through. For one, it's going to increase the cost of running those platforms, the border borders and tuk-tuks, and we'll probably see less and less of them on the road, or rather whoever can maintain or can afford to keep them on the road. Because remember already, they don't operate without insurance. I was reading the Business Daily and they're saying that the cost of insuring themselves, because they have a comprehensive cover on the asset itself, because you need to insure the asset.
Yes, you must
Just in case
insure.
someone steals it or
The
fire.
third party is anybody around
because
you.
they have a cost. You have to insure the assets. They take themselves. They take personal accident cover, and all this add up to about 10,000 shillings in premiums, annual premiums for them.
Okay.
Now, add on top a third party cover. I think the cost of running those ventures is going to balloon.
Okay.
If you really mean to keep that thing on the road, you really need to keep it on the road. But
Interesting. So
you're more likely
that's
to
a
see
good-
a reduction of those tuk-tuks and border borders on the roads.
I hope not. They really help me in traffic
I don't like. There's so many of them in Mombasa.
when there's traffic. But then let me ask you again. Let's go back to this IMF report and their conclusions. What influence, do you think there's any influence that the IMF might be having on the fiscal and monetary policy? What do you think? And do you
yes.
think there's any correlation? I mean, I do appreciate certainly that Dr. Jogona our governor, who's
Dr. Njoroge,
Dr. Njoroge, I apologize. Dr. Patrick Njoroge, stamp has been increased. When he got into the office, I've not been in the industry for very long, not as long as he has, but I like the fact that he was coming from IMF, because it gave me the assurance that any decisions that he's making are factual, they're fundamental, and there's rigorous analysis of what's happening. And also the fact that he's coming from the IMF, then in a way he brings a different way of looking at things. Yeah. So what do you think about his IMF background, what the IMF is reporting today, what the CS has said in terms of his proposals in the finance bill? What do you think? Do you think there's undue influence from one particular party, or do you think it's an independent, both institutions are independent?
I think IMF are bullies, my view. They're bullies. They really tried to push down an SB on us, the standby arrangement on us. At a point that even me, my view was, we don't need this, because the exchange rate market was stable. We had stable reserves. We were about 5 months. They kept pushing all this, and I'm so happy that the governor stood his ground.
That was the best thing. Up to now,
he stood his ground.
I
For an
like
ex-IMF,
well.
you would expect that he would buy into this.
He's very objective.
I tell you what, me there, IMF last week, I think not a couple of days ago, IMF released an analysis of its performance of its programs across 133 countries in the world for a six-year period between 2011 and 2017. And the most interesting key outtake out of that report was that only a third of its debt sustainability programs have been successful. Wow. The IMF need to review their working formula. They need to review some of their programs.
So then, are you saying we should leave the rate cap?
But we should leave it.
We should leave the rate cap.
Banks need to find a new way of living.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fair enough. That one I agree with you. But then, where are we going to get it from? Because the bulk of the funding here, let me tell you, this is the reality. So I have a couple of friends, or I know people who are in the SME, micro SME space. So there's this gentleman I'm speaking to, or rather I was seated in a social space, and he says he gets jeans from Kampala, and then he brings them here. So he gets an overnight bus, goes and gets jeans. It's considerably cheaper then brings them back here. But then he's on all these apps, mobile lending apps. So it's like, oh wow, then that must make your work easier. I suppose that you actually borrow money, then when you go to Kampala, instead of buying 2 items, you probably buy 10 because now you have. He's like, Z. I'm like, so what do you use your money for? Sasa unajua msupa akinipigia, hiyo do naendanga kumbaya nampelekanga Nando's. So it was very puzzling. So I'm like, why do you take this money that you have to pay for to go and consume?
It's a very expensive cost.
He said, again, I just speak Swahili as he said verbatim, ni jumaze hizi ma-apps nanipatia 1,000 ama 2,000. Mimi mse wa soko, sasa nataka 20 ama 30,000, hazitanipatia. Hata nikizichukua kwa zote napata 5,000. So, mi siwezi nikafanya biashara na hii najienjoy. He brought out a very interesting perspective, which is what the CBK has been trying to address. The thing is, you cannot ignore the fact that this money that we are all talking about, your savings, my savings, they're sitting in the banks. The majority of them are sitting. Whatever they're earning, that's a different conversation. But you cannot ignore the fact that for you to access them, you must go through which door? It's either you go through that door, or you can keep collecting 1,000 and paying it back, 1,000 and paying it back. So for you to actually have that funding that's going to the SME, there's the chamas, there's the SACCOs, but then the depth of that.
Yeah. Sorry, be there. Time is up.
Time is up.
We could go on with this.
Buy banks. That's what you're saying.
Keep off banks.
Buy banks.
Keep off banks.
One times book.
We burn your capital. All right. That was it. Have a nice evening. See you tomorrow morning.